43 seconds after Calvin Merritt called his wife a fool on the Family Feud stage in front of 200 people and 3 live cameras, Steve Harvey had Calvin's microphone in his own hand. Calvin's family in a private conversation with a producer off stage, and Calvin himself standing in a hallway outside stage 4 with a security escort, and no clear sense of how the afternoon had arrived at this particular destination. It was April 7th, 2022. Calvin Merritt was 51 years old. His wife Denise was 48. Their son Marcus was 19, standing at the far end of the family's podium with his hands at his sides and his jaw set in the particular way that young men hold their jaws when they are watching something they have seen before and have spent their whole lives trying not to become. The word Calvin had used was not a synonym for fool. It was the word itself, delivered with the casual precision of a man who has said it many times in private and did not, in the heat of the moment, register that this time there were cameras. Steve Harvey registered it. He registered it the way a tuning fork registers a note, instantly, completely, in his whole body. He said, "That's enough." Calvin said something back. Steve said, "Sir, you are going to stop talking, or you are going to leave this stage. Those are your options." Calvin laughed. The kind of laugh a man produces when he believes the social contract protects him from consequences. Steve did not laugh. "Security," he said. The studio fell completely silent. It was a Thursday in Atlanta. The Merritt family had driven up from Macon. Calvin, Denise, Marcus, Denise's sister Paulette, and Paulette's husband Jerome, who had been watching Calvin Merritt operate for 22 years with the resigned patience of a man who had said everything he had to say about it to Denise in private, and understood that the saying had not changed anything, and so had stopped saying it, and started simply being present, in the hope that presence was its own kind of argument. The competing family was the Washington family from Birmingham. They had arrived first, claimed the better green room by accident, and spent the pre-show time playing cards, which the production team later said was the most relaxed pre-show behavior they had seen all season. Neither family knew what the morning would produce. What the morning would produce was this. At 11:47 a.m., during the second round of play, Denise Merritt would give an answer that Steve Harvey would confirm as correct. Calvin would disagree. He would say, into an open microphone, in front of a studio audience, that Denise never thought before she spoke. Steve would ask him to redirect. Calvin would ignore the redirect. Steve would ask again. Calvin would turn to Denise and use the word. 43 seconds later, Calvin was in the hallway. But that was not the story. The story was what happened after Calvin left, and what Marcus Merritt did with the microphone his father had just vacated, and what he said into it that made Steve Harvey sit down on the edge of the stage for the second time in his career. What she said next would change everything, but not how anyone expected. Marcus Lamont Merritt had been watching his father treat his mother this way since he was 4 years old. He was 4 the first time he understood that the way his father spoke to his mother was different from the way other fathers spoke to other mothers. He could not have articulated this at 4, but children understand atmospheres before they understand words, and the atmosphere of the Merritt household had always carried a particular pressure, low, constant. The kind that doesn't announce itself as pressure because it never fully lifts. Calvin Merritt was not a violent man. He had never raised his hand. He had raised his voice rarely. What he had done, steadily, across 23 years of marriage, was smaller and more pervasive than either of those things. He had corrected Denise in public. He had finished her sentences in the direction he preferred them to go. He had described her opinions as cute. He had introduced her at parties as my wife, who means well. He had, on 400 Ordinary Tuesdays, made her feel like a minor character in a story that was primarily about him. Denise Merritt had absorbed this the way water absorbs into limestone, slowly, invisibly, with structural consequences that don't show on the surface until the surface finally gives. She had been a dental hygienist for 18 years. She had raised Marcus largely alone in the logistical sense, because Calvin traveled for work, and travel was, in Calvin's accounting, equivalent to absence rather than a form of it. She had kept the house and the finances and Marcus's school schedule and her own quiet interior life, which she had maintained at some cost, the way people maintain things that are not valued by the people around them. She had told her sister Paulette, once, in 2019, that she felt like a room that people walked through on the way to somewhere else. Paulette had held that sentence for 3 years. It was Paulette who submitted the Family Feud application. She told Denise it was a birthday gift. She did not tell Calvin until the producers called, because she knew that Calvin's opinion of the show would need to be managed, and that management was easier after the fact. Calvin had grumbled. He had come. He had driven the whole way and talked the whole way about the questions he planned to answer, the strategy he had developed, the things Denise should let him handle. Denise had looked out the window. Marcus, in the back seat, had watched his mother look out the window. He had seen her do it before, the way she turned her face away not to see something different, but to stop being seen. He was 19 years old. He was 2 months away from leaving for college in Atlanta. He had been waiting to leave for 3 years, not because he did not love his mother, but because staying felt like participation and leaving felt like the only form of protest available to him. He had not understood until very recently that leaving was not, in fact, protest, that the protest was something else, something harder. Nobody in that studio knew what Marcus was carrying into that building. The game had gone well for the first 40 minutes. Calvin was competitive in the way of men who treat competition as a measure of personal worth. Intensely, audibly, with a running commentary on his own performance that the studio audience found mildly entertaining, and that Denise and Marcus found familiar. Denise played cleanly. She was quick and accurate, and twice received genuine applause from the audience in the way that audiences applaud when someone does something better than expected, which the audience had not expected, because Calvin's presence had pre-suggested a different hierarchy. Steve had noticed Denise's quickness. He had also noticed the way she looked at Calvin after each correct answer, not for approval. Exactly, but in the reflexive way of someone who has been checking a particular face for a reaction for so long that the check happens before the thought. He had noticed Marcus noticing this too. When Calvin said the word, the studio did not gasp. It went silent in the way that spaces go silent when something has been said that cannot be unsaid and the room is deciding what to do with the fact of it. Denise's hand moved to the edge of the podium, not gripping, just touching, the way you touch something solid when the ground becomes briefly uncertain. Marcus moved toward his father. Steve moved faster. Security, one word. Delivered flat, without heat, which made it more authoritative than if he had shouted it. Mr. Merritt, you are done on this stage. Calvin began to argue. Steve turned his back, not in dismissal, in completion. The argument did not warrant a response. The security team, to their credit, had already begun moving. Calvin was escorted off the stage with the professional efficiency of people who had been briefed on this possibility before the taping began. Because Steve Harvey had told his production team during the pre-show walkthrough that if the situation on stage escalated in the direction it had suggested it might escalate, they were to be ready. He had been watching Calvin in the green room footage. He had been ready. The studio fell completely silent for the second time. Steve turned back to the stage. Denise was still standing at the podium. Paulette had her hand on Denise's arm. Jerome was looking at the floor with the expression of a man who has been right about something for a long time and finds no satisfaction in being confirmed. Marcus was still standing where he had moved to, one step forward, one step toward where his father had been, his hands still at his sides, his jaw still set. Steve walked toward Marcus. He stopped in front of him. "You all right?" he asked. Marcus looked at him. He was 19 years old, and he was the size of a man, and his eyes were doing something complicated. He said, "I've been watching him do that my whole life." The studio was absolutely quiet. "I know," Steve said. "I could tell." Marcus looked at his mother. Denise was looking at the podium surface. "She never says anything," Marcus said. "She just takes it. Every time." Steve said, "Why do you think she does that?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. The boom waited. The audience waited. 200 people in a television studio holding their breath for a 19-year-old boy to find the words for something he had been living since he was 4. "Because she loves him," Marcus said. "And because she's been doing it so long, she doesn't know what it would feel like to stop." Steve Harvey looked at Marcus Merritt for a long time. Then he said, "Can I give you the microphone?" Marcus looked at it. He nodded. Steve handed him the microphone. Marcus turned to his mother. The studio fell completely silent for the 3rd time. He said, "Mama, I need to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it." His voice was steady in the way that young voices are steady when the emotion behind them is too large for unsteadiness, when falling apart is not an option, and so the voice becomes something else, something harder and more careful. "You are the smartest person I know. You are funnier than he ever let you be in front of people. You work harder than anyone I have ever seen, and I have watched you disappear, a little bit at a time, for as long as I can remember. And I am leaving for college in 2 months, and I have been telling myself that leaving was okay, because there was nothing I could do. But I was wrong. There is one thing I can do. I can stand here and tell you, in front of all these people, that what he does to you is not what you deserve. It has never been what you deserve. And I need you to know that I see it. I have always seen it. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner." Denise Merritt looked at her son. Her hand was still on the podium. And then it wasn't. She took it off the podium and she pressed it to her mouth, and she looked at Marcus with the expression of a woman receiving something she had stopped expecting to receive. The crew was not working. The floor director had his clipboard at his side. The boom operator had not adjusted position in 4 minutes. A camera operator said later that he had not cut away once during Marcus's speech, and that he would not have cut away for anything. Paulette was crying without making a sound. Steve Harvey stepped back from the center of the stage and let Marcus have it. He stood to the side and watched. He did not narrate. He did not add. He understood that the moment was not his, and that his job right now was to protect it from interruption. After a long moment, he came back to the center. "I need to say something," he said. His voice was rougher than usual. "When I was coming up, when I was at the bottom, sitting on a curb in Cleveland with nothing left in me, an old man stopped. A stranger. I had never seen him. I never saw him again. He looked at me and he said, 'Young man, God's got a plan bigger than your pain.' That's all." He walked away. But I held on to that sentence for 30 years. Because it was the first time in a long time that somebody stopped to see me. He looked at Marcus. "You just stopped for your mother, At 19 years old, you stopped and you saw her. Do you understand what that is? Marcus said nothing. His eyes were doing the complicated thing again. Steve said, "That is the whole thing. That is the whole thing right there." But Steve wasn't done. He asked for a phone. He said he wanted to make one call. The producer brought the phone. Steve dialed a number that Marcus had given him during the break, a number Marcus had offered quietly, without being asked, saying only, "There's somebody who should hear this. He's been trying to say it to my dad for 20 years. The number was Calvin's father. His name was Earl Merritt. He was 77 years old. He lived in Augusta, Georgia. He had watched his son become a particular kind of man, and had spent 20 years trying to reach him through the particular difficulty of reaching a man who does not believe he needs to be reached. Earl answered on the second ring. Steve introduced himself. Earl said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Is Calvin all right?" Steve said, "Calvin is outside the building. But I have your grandson on this stage, and he just said something you need to hear." He handed the phone to Marcus. Marcus held it to his ear. He said, "Granddad, it's me." He paused. "I told Mama the thing, in front of everybody." Another pause. "Yeah," his jaw moved. "I know, Granddad, I know." Whatever Earl said in those 15 seconds, Marcus held it in his chest for the rest of that afternoon. When he handed the phone back to Steve, Steve said into it, "Mr. Merritt, your grandson is the best thing your family has produced. I want you to know that." Earl Merritt said, and the boom caught it through the phone, "I know it. I've known it since he was little." "Your son is watching you now," Steve said, turning the 5-word quote outward, into the camera, into the room, letting it settle where it needed to settle. That's the thing about sons. They are always watching. They learn what they see. And sometimes, they decide to learn the opposite. When that happens, it means somebody did something right somewhere. "Mr. Merritt, your grandson did something right today." The studio fell completely silent one final time. Steve addressed the camera directly. "Everyone at home, if you are raising a son, or if you are a son, understand this. The most important thing you will ever teach or learn is how to stop. How to stop and turn around and see the person standing behind you who has been absorbing everything, because sons become fathers. And what they watched, they carry. And what they decide to put down, what they actively, consciously, out loud decide to put down, that is the beginning of something different. Marcus Merritt put something down today, in front of all of us. And I believe him. Both families won. The Washington family from Birmingham contributed their full game winnings without deliberation. Their family patriarch, a man named James who was 63 and had driven up from Birmingham thinking he was going to play a game show, and had instead watched something that made him call his own son during the break, said into the microphone, "We didn't earn this today." He did. He pointed at Marcus. "Give it to him." Denise Merritt did not go back to Macon that evening. She went to Paulette's apartment in Atlanta and stayed for 5 days. On the 3rd day, Marcus drove over after his pre-enrollment appointment at his university and sat at Paulette's kitchen table with his mother and his aunt and drank sweet tea and talked for 3 hours about things the Merritt household had not talked about out loud before. On the 4th day, Denise called an attorney. Calvin Merritt entered a counseling program in June 2022. He went voluntarily. Marcus did not know this until August, when his grandfather Earl called him at his college dormitory to tell him. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay, Granddad." Then he said, Is he actually going? Earl said, he's going. Every week. Marcus said, good. He paused. That's good. He has not said more than that publicly. The clip aired the following week. Within 12 hours, 29 million views. Within 3 days, 140 million. At the end of the month, 298 million across platforms. The hashtag Your Son Is Watching You trended in the United States for 6 days and reached 39 countries. It was featured in parenting publications, men's interest platforms, and 3 major network segments on intergenerational cycles of behavior. A prominent family therapy organization produced a viewing guide around the clip for use in couples counseling sessions. The guide was downloaded 180,000 times in the first 2 weeks. Steve Harvey established the Marcus Forward Foundation in the fall of 2022. The name carried 2 meanings. Marcus, for the 19-year-old who had picked up a microphone and said the true thing, and forward, for the direction that becomes possible once the true thing is said. The foundation funds counseling access for families navigating emotionally abusive relationship patterns, with a specific program for young men, sons, who are processing what they witnessed in childhood and want support in building different patterns. As of 2024, the foundation had served 900 individuals across 31 states. Its Young Men's program had a 6-month waitlist and had begun partnering with universities to offer on-campus access points. Marcus Merritt graduated from his university in Atlanta in May 2026. Denise was there. Paulette was there. Jerome was there. Earl drove up from Augusta and sat in the 3rd row and cried without any particular embarrassment about it. Because at 78, Earl Merritt had stopped being embarrassed about crying at things worth crying at. Calvin was there too. He sat in a different section. He did not approach Denise. He watched his son walk across the stage and receive his diploma, and he sat with whatever that cost him, privately, without making it anyone else's business. After the ceremony, Marcus found his grandfather first. He hugged Earl for a long time. Then he found his mother. He handed her the diploma. She looked at it. She handed it back. She said, "That's yours." He said, "I know. I just wanted you to hold it for a second." She held it. On a stage in Atlanta in April 2022, a 19-year-old boy accepted a microphone from a man who had just removed his father from a room. And he turned to his mother, and he said the thing that had been true his entire life and had never been said out loud. He did not say it perfectly. He did not have the words fully formed. He had the feeling, and he had the courage, and he had the example of a man who had spent 30 years stopping for strangers and building something from the stopping. That was enough. Some lessons take a generation to unlearn. Some cycles require one person, in one moment, to turn around and say, "Not me. Not like this. Not anymore." Marcus Merritt turned around on a Thursday morning in Atlanta when he was 19 years old and had nothing in his hands except the truth and the microphone. That turned out to be exactly enough. Subscribe now and share this with a son or a father or anyone who needed to hear that it is never too late to turn around.